My name is Avinash. I'm the CEO of Dun & Bradstreet. I'm based in Bombay, and it's good to see you all here. Lots of familiar faces. We're a little bit over time, as you guys know. So I'll go through some of the comments I wanted to share. And then after me, you got even better speakers. We got Mr. Koshi, who is leading the ONDC initiative, and he'll speak a little bit. And then we are in partnership with them. We'll share a little bit of those details with you. And then obviously we got Mr. Sanyal as well. And then we got the awards, and obviously the dinner and the party. So great. So it gives me a lot of pleasure to address this August gathering of the 14th edition of the Dun & Bradstreet Business Enterprises of Tomorrow. And I've been in Dun & Bradstreet 3 years, so I've done it, I had the pleasure of doing it for 3 years in a row. And this is our summit. It's the platform for you guys, the SME enterprises and the mid-corporates, to come together, chart the course of your future, celebrate the successes which a lot of you have done, and the enthusiasm for entrepreneurship. And clearly the summit recognizes the critical role played by all of you in the country's growth, which is our central theme for this year, development, and also importantly, which a lot of us will have touched upon during the day, on international trade, which is a very much important part of what as a country we want to do. So let me begin by dwelling a little bit on the central theme of the deliberations for today and this evening. I mean, a lot of you know what Dun & Bradstreet does. We're a very, very old legacy firm, if I can call it so. We've been around for 180 years, which is a very, very long time. So, we started in 1840 or so. As I love sharing the story that in our coffee table books, we say that 4 US presidents worked for Dun & Bradstreet. For some of you who follow history, that would be very interesting. The one which boggles my mind is that Abraham Lincoln worked for Dun & Bradstreet. So if we had a similar conference 160 years ago, maybe Abraham Lincoln would have been sitting here, which is a bizarre thing. So we are a very old firm, but basically at core, we provide lots and lots of data, and on top of the data, we want to provide insights on how to make businesses more effective, more competitive, more capable of getting financing, find new markets, and all of that. And that's the core, right? And that's all we all want to make life easier for doing business. We've been in India also now close to 30 years. So we came in just about when India opened up. And interestingly, we were shareholders in what is now as CIBIL. So we set up CIBIL with HDFC and SBI. You had SBI speak to you a little while earlier. So that was CIBIL. We were a founding shareholder and we set that up. And just before on the stage, you had Shankar. I don't know if he's left the room. But Shankar is the CEO of Equity, who was sitting on the extreme right. That's a rating agency. That's one of the 5-6 rating agencies in the country. And we own 35% of that business, along with SIDBI and with banks like ICICI and SBI. So we've been around the block a fair bit. We know a fair bit about what's happening. And just a little bit of color as to give you perspective of where we come from. Because we've been around so long, we've been kind of looking at the world and capturing data. So we have this concept of the DUNS number, which is a unique number, which, Koshi will also see being given to some of the ONDC suppliers today. Unique 9-digit number, never dies. And it helps us basically, keep that as a unique identifier for companies. So we've been doing this for a while. So we have approximately, 500 million plus people with a DUNS number globally. That's a fairly large number. In India, we have DUNS number on something like 32 million of companies like yourselves. So that's also a very large number. 32 million in India, 511 million actually to be precise, currently globally. Now the interesting thing to share, which I found very fascinating when I started looking at this data, out of this 511 million DUNS numbers which we have, DUNSified entities, something like 230 million are inactive. Either they're not doing business, or they have folded up, liquidated, gone bankrupt, whatever. So even in the Indian context, when you look at MCA data, typically after 10 years, if a company opens, half the companies kind of die in 10 years. So that's pretty much known globally. So 511 companies with a DUNS number, 230 million odd are no more or inactive. So out of the 280 million people who are active globally, that's pretty much the number, guess how many listed companies are there in the world? Anybody hazard a guess? How many listed companies? A guess? Million? Somebody said a number that I couldn't hear you. A little louder? 10 million, yeah. So, in the world globally, there are only less than 100,000, less than 1 million, 1 lakh listed companies. It's around 70, 80,000 companies. So that is the listed universe globally. That's the one you can pretty much get a lot of information because they're listed. Because every regulator will say, please disclose to your shareholders and all of that. These guys were talking about BRSR, which for the Indian companies, for example, needs to be done. More than $100 million, now I've given you one benchmark, more than $100 million, 700-800 crores of revenue. How many companies in the world? Take a guess. How many? 5,000. Now you swung to the other side, huh? So it's around 125,000, 1,25,000 companies, which have a turnover of more than 700-800 crores. Interestingly, more than $5 million, which is around 40 crores, I'll save you the misery, it's also only around 5-6 million companies. So the point I'm trying to make, the entire world is SME. The entire world is, out of that 280 million companies, something like 5-6 million are more than $5 million. Everybody else is in the small end. So the problems we discuss in this room, the problems we face in India, the problems you face in India are very similar to the problems people face everywhere else too. It's about getting what Koshi is trying to do through ONDC, make an equal platform. You're trying to give credibility, you're trying to give visibility to companies, you're trying to make it easier to get financing, you're trying to easier to get new markets. So that's our job. And we talk to a lot of people in India, and what we see is a can-do spirit and the belief that, India's time has come. And that's why, we've got this theme for this year, which is the road to Atmanirbhar Bhavashya, which even the gentleman from SBI talked about. So I've got a lot of points here, and maybe I won't cover all of them. I'll cover some of the salient points, and maybe some of the takeaways from what we see. In the policy of the Atmanirbhar Bhavashya, there are 5 pillars: economy, demography, demand, infrastructure, and system. And maybe I'll touch upon each of them very quickly. So the economy, I guess, you must have covered it during the day. MSME is a large part of the GDP, pretty much in most countries. Large part of exports, large part of manufacturing output, 30% of, approximately of GDP, with the intention to for the government to increase it if the economy has to grow. And I don't know if during the day, I didn't check with Dr. Arun, our global economist, if he covered it, but who's contributing to this? So one of the big things which Dun & Bradstreet keeps banging away is that in India, out of the 100 entities across the board, 95% of them are on the micro end. So a very large number of companies are micro, stay micro, and remain micro. They really don't move up the curve, which is the big challenge, right? Size matters, scale matters. And compared to most of the other larger advanced countries, you would see that half of the mix is only on the micro end. Companies are able to graduate and become bigger, which is a big challenge in the Indian context. So, we call it, the economists call it the missing middle, and that really is a challenge because I mentioned because of scale, because of size. The bigger you are, the easier for financing, easier to compete, easier to get better employees, easier to get more technology and all of that. But from a local point of view, scale is also important because one of the things which leads to demographics also in the country is employment. So, the challenge is employment. So if you have companies which graduate up, become bigger, you will have a lot more jobs being created. And we all hear the numbers, 230 million jobs to be created over the last 25 years, and that needs to happen if this 5 trillion and larger numbers which are talked about in terms of GDP need to get done. So clearly, that's size, and economy is a big pillar. Leading very quickly onto the second pillar, which is demographics. You know, an opportunity always becomes a curse at some point in time, right? You have a demographic dividend, and if you don't act upon it properly, it'll become a demographic bomb, right? Because unless you become wealthier and hopefully wiser, before you become older, you'll have a problem. And that's same for the country, right? So if you don't become wealthier and we all become older, then the country is not going anywhere. And I mean, most of you must follow what's happening globally. So, I think yesterday Japan came out with its stats on population. The population of Japan has declined by 1 million people last year. So, other countries are had that demographic dividend. Japan had the demographic dividend after World War II, and now it's going through the other end of the cycle. So in Japan, they had something like, 750,000, or 750,000 babies last year. Despite those 750,000 babies, the population degrew by 1 million. So it just shows you how many people are older. So 45% of Japan is over 60 years old. And those are pretty similar stats in many countries, right? So we are lucky. We have a very young population, but we really got to make the most of it in terms of creating the demographic dividend and creating those jobs, which a lot of the jobs are obviously going to be created by MSMEs, and that stands on itself. So the third pillar is demand, and you're producing local products. ONDC's mantra really in terms of helping local products, local suppliers get global markets, local markets. I mean, those are all good things. Unless we do that and we have, we create the jobs, we create domestic demand, and we will have challenges around, satisfying our own demand. And clearly, there's no point in relying on exports from that perspective. So maybe on the demographic demand, and I'll leave it there for now. In terms of the fourth pillar, which is really on infrastructure, a lot of money going into infrastructure. This fiscal year, the government's committed something like $122 billion for infrastructure. Hopefully, private sector will follow. It's not really following full steam right now, but one hopes will follow. What's good about that compared to other times before? I think the Indian private sector was always highly leveraged, or more leveraged than now. So I can't, emphasize that strongly. The deleveraging in the Indian economy has been tremendous. Maybe on the personal side, it's higher leverage, but on the corporate side, clearly there is, a huge amount of deleverage. So this time it's different. If the right opportunities are there to invest, I think the corporate balance sheets can have it. State Bank was here presenting earlier. Do you guys know how much profit State Bank made in March 23? 50,000 crores. You said 50, right? 50,000 crores. 50,000 crores is the profit made by State Bank. Typically they used to make how much before? 10, 15,000 crores, So imagine putting that money just back onto the balance sheet, and how banks, you put equity back, you can leverage it 1:10. So just imagine the multiplier effect, and that's why I guess all the banking stocks are doing so well in the market currently. So the ability on the balance sheet to put money to work, and hopefully that infrastructure will come about. Credit for MSME, I think again State Bank, I didn't know the number, we work a lot with them. He said they had 1,000 MSME lending branches with 2,000 officers. So all banks which we work with, the whole basis of data, he talked about, the thrust to lend to MSMEs is there. Now the MSMEs have to also step up and be able to take that money from the system. And that brings me to the last thing, which is really on the system. The Prime Minister, I think at the opening in your city of the old Pragati Maidan, talked about at the end of his cycle, the economy being the third largest GDP ahead of Germany and Japan and behind the US and China. I mean, that is really a very strong statement to get to in 5-6 years time. I don't see any reason why India will not get there, provided we maintain this course of this somewhere between 5.5% and 6.5% growth, and I really hope we'll get there. And infrastructure has been built around that. The digital infrastructure, good case in point, I'm just picking on Mr. Koshi here because, the Open Network for Digital Commerce, ONDC, who we partner with in terms of making some of our products available for MSMEs. I didn't touch upon that in the beginning. The DUNS number leads to many other products which can be used by MSMEs to get the visibility locally, internationally, get help on the ESG side, which this sustainability panel talked about. So I think, the infrastructure today, there's physical infrastructure, and then there's a whole world of digital infrastructure, which I again cannot overemphasize, how much work is going on behind that. My colleague Alok just walked in. Yesterday we had a call with a person in the US, which, is using technology to digitize records to a point, that lending can be made easier and more transparent of physical infrastructure, road infrastructure, real estate infrastructure. So all these are, very fundamental changes which are happening, which hopefully will lead to the vision of the third largest GDP and the Atmanirbhar self-reliance. Maybe just touching upon very quickly again, the pressing challenges which we see, which you guys go through. First and foremost, obviously, is financing. My boss, who sits in New York, Neeraj Sahai, and our global economist, Dr. Arun, wrote an article which came out in ET a while ago, and I'll kind of quote some stats from that. The World Bank says that, only 15% of Indian MSMEs have a loan, which we know, compared to mostly around, 50% in some of the other countries. And the rejection rate of MSMEs loan is very high. It's near close to 30%. And that's what I was saying, that, MSMEs also need to adapt, need to change to be able to take the capital from the banking system, even the shadow banking system if the need arises. And those comparable stats in other countries are much lower. The lack of credit history obviously is a major reason for the rejection of these loans, but there are solutions around it, right? So there are solutions around scores. We at Dun & Bradstreet itself do a lot of scores. We have this global PAYDEX scores, which helps people decide, if this guy is worth doing business with, how quickly will we pay. We have failure scores, we have supplier evaluation indices, supplier sustainability scores, and all these various scores. We are working with Equite, we are working with SIDBI very closely to come out with these scores which can make it easier for MSMEs to borrow from. So again, data, digital infrastructure, openness to share data on your behalf will help the ecosystem lend to you better. The other big problem in financing obviously is that, smaller the company, lesser visible the company, more lumpy the data, more opaque the data, the premium to borrow is much higher. So, a small company could pay anywhere higher than, 500-600 basis points, 5-6% compared to a large company. I think the other problem which is getting resolved but not really resolved is the whole insolvency problem. So the insolvency problem is resolved on the bigger end. So when even on the bigger end you have, I was going to say, Indigo recently is going through that process. Jet Airways went through the process and has not come out of it. On the bigger end, at least there's a process. But on the smaller end, they are the pre-packaged kind of solution which allows a company to function. My colleague who just, Saurabh, who's based in Delhi, I was chatting with outside. He went to see Birla Soft, the IT services business, which has a problem, basically because one of their bigger clients in the US went bankrupt. And as part of the bankruptcy solution in the US, you actually can force your suppliers to work with you for a limited period of time. So, it's a unique problem. So this pre-packaged solution, which allows small companies to function, get the haircut from the financing guys and function, that really has not taken off. The whole business of debt to equity swaps, and I'll tell you a little bit of a personal story on that. I sit on the board of a company called Jupiter Wagons, which has become a big company now. So they bought a company out of bankruptcy called Sepco. Sepco is a listed company, a Jabalpur-based company. And in that there were three banks, and I'll name the banks because it's history. There was Axis Bank, there was Tata Capital, and there was HDFC. The loan was around $250 crores. The banks accepted a haircut and sold the business to Jupiter Wagons. Axis Bank, and hats off to them, Tata Capital said we will do a debt to equity swap. So they converted some of the debt, they took a haircut and converted some of the debt to equity. HDFC Bank in its own wisdom, maybe thought it was too much of a problem, they took the haircut, they said we'll take for 100 rupees, we give us 60 rupees and we go home and we forgive your loans. That company, when the deal happened, was valued at around something like $10 million. The market capital of Jupiter Wagons today is $1 billion. It's 100 times. Axis Bank and Tata Capital have made money on that loan by taking those shares. So Axis Bank, for example, because I was involved in that process, took 9 million shares. Those 9 million shares are worth much more than the loan which Axis Bank gave to this company. So this debt to equity swap, pre-packaged solutions, these are the ways to go, which we have put into place, but we really not put into effect practically. And that will really help financing come to the MSME and make the market a lot more vibrant. So, and a lot more confident. So just wrapping up on the confidence bit, we do a fair bit of work in your space. So we have 2 indices which we do. We work with ASSOCHAM, and we have a small business confidence index, which we do every quarter. It's available on the website. You should see it if you're members. How many people from members of ASSOCHAM here? Not many? Few. So do you participate in the survey? No? So do you participate in the confidence survey? No. So Nahid, who's the guy there, if you give me your card, I'll have him call you. So the unfortunate bit is that the last survey, which was Q2 of this year, most of the indicators are negative. That that you guys are telling that it's a lot tougher to hire people. It's a lot more difficult to export given what's happening outside. The only bit positive is the cost of raw materials, which has come off compared to last year. So it's a reflection on Q2 of last year and a Q3 or Q2 of this year. And I guess nothing wrong with that. If you guys followed what Infosys said last week, Infosys reduced its guidance from 4%, 7% range to 1 to 3% range. That's a big drop. And Tech Mahindra came out with its results day before yesterday, the worst quarter ever. So things are tough. But I guess in tough times is when you got to kind of get your act together and make sure that you can survive. So I guess for the reasons of that, we have this platform, Business Enterprises of Tomorrow. We come together to discuss issues and look at people, what they're doing and how well and how better they could do. So just maybe concluding up and talking a little bit about what we found this year. As I mentioned, we have a large database of MSMEs. In India, as I said, we have 32 million DUNS numbers entities. Out of that 32 million, by the way, approximately 25 million are operational. So the 7-8 million are the dead ones or the not operating ones. And as I said, we do lots of insights and scores on them. So as an endeavor of ours for the 14th year to acknowledge and recognize leading companies across SMEs and mid-corporate sector, we had listed 4,000 SMEs and 1,000 mid-corporates in the leading SMEs of India, leading mid-corporates of India, 2023 publications. The companies have been shortlisted from a universe of companies through our proprietary methodology. And I'll share some insights from that, and I hope you'll go to the website and read these publications hence. So one out of 7 listed companies has shown a consistent top-line CAGR growth, compounded annual growth rate of more than 20%. In the last 2 years, FY 20 to 22. 1 out of 14 listed companies has shown consistent top-line CAGR growth of 30% in the last 2 years. And the last 2 years have been fairly difficult period for everybody. At an aggregate level, the companies listed in the publication which I mentioned, the 4,000 and the 1,000 companies have shown top-line growth of 28%, which is quite similar to the top-line growth of the Nifty 50. So the best of class, excluding the BFSI and oil and gas, which have really had some abnormal periods, right? So really reflects on a strong rebound post the COVID crisis, and of course the global kind of crisis in terms of supply chain, and that continues. The revenues of engineering sectors such as machinery, allied component manufacturing, very important part, fabricated, primarily metal products and transportation equipment has outperformed other sectors. We have this global database, so people inquire on each other. So, we will have a global company inquiring on a Indian SME to check if you can do business with them, who's the owner, Is it KYC okay, AML okay? What are the scores? And what the things we are doing with Mr. Koshi in ONDC, giving a DUNS number, giving a DRS, giving a ERS, some kind of badging, some kind of certification, some kind of authenticity. So people check on that. So we see that flow. So we have millions and millions of these checks done every year. And in the engineering space, which I just touched upon, the number of checks has phenomenally gone up. And the other interesting thing which you guys will like to hear as well. So maybe a couple of years ago, 90% of these checks used to be from North America. It used to be the most important export market for India is the US still, right? So 90% of these checks used to be from companies based in North America on Indian companies, US and Canada. That number is now down to around 70%. And the remaining 30% is really a lot of Europe and a little bit of Asia. So just shows you how the world is playing out. So, in many ways, it's India's moment. It's India's MSME moment to fill the void and to kind of step up and, create the jobs, create the growth, and help basically making the Atmanirbhar future which we are talking about. So maybe just wrapping up, thank you for your time, and I guess you've been very patient with your time in terms of some of the panels and the discussions which have happened. We've got a short but very exciting evening. After me, you've got Mr. Koshi talking a little bit of ONDC, and then we got Mr. Sanyal. And I look forward to hearing the views like you guys do. And then obviously we'll have the awards, and then possibly, I hope you'll stay for the dinner and the party as well. So thank you. I'll conclude now, and I'm around, so I'll be happy to discuss more. Thank you.